Iran fears war may return but still leaves room for talks. First U.S. crude cargo reaches Japan since the Iran conflict erupted. The U.S. holds advantage across strategic straits, pressuring Beijing's Belt and Road network. Ukraine breaches defenses in Crimea as Russia is forced to defend from the Black Sea to the Urals. Iran is growing increasingly concerned that Donald Trump could restart a military campaign at any moment. Ari Khan, a member of Iran's Parliamentary National Security Committee, warned that the U.S. president could launch another war against the Islamic Republic under pressure from Israel. He argued that the continued U.S. military presence shows the risk of another attack has not disappeared, but has only been temporarily paused. However, alongside those military warnings, Iran is also sending diplomatic signals. Al-Mayadeen reported that Iranian officials are discussing a new formula that could open the way for renewed talks with the United States if Washington agrees. This indicates Tehran still wants to keep the door to negotiations open, but only under terms favorable to itself. Sources say Iran's precondition is a complete halt to hostilities on all fronts, especially in Lebanon. The issue of the Strait of Hormuz would be moved to a second phase of negotiations, while the nuclear file would only be addressed in a third stage. Tehran appears determined to prioritize regional security first before discussing more sensitive matters. In another development, Iran's state news agency said Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is expected to meet Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is also reportedly expected to join the discussions. The move suggests Iran wants closer coordination with Russia before entering any round of negotiations with the United States. With military pressure still present, Tehran wants to strengthen international backing to avoid arriving at the table from a position of weakness. Tehran is preparing for both outcomes: confrontation if necessary, negotiation if advantageous. Integral fractures in Tehran as hardliners gain ground. If he assumes control of negotiations, it would further expose fractures inside Tehran's power structure. Another Iranian hardliner is now moving closer to taking charge of future nuclear negotiations. Fox News, citing new reports, said instability continues to grow within Tehran's negotiating camp as it deals with Washington. According to those reports, Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf could be replaced by a conservative figure known for an uncompromising position on the nuclear issue. If accurate, that would signal Tehran is shifting toward a harder line just before any new contacts with Washington. On April 24th, Iran International reported that Saeed Jalili, 60, an influential figure within the conservative camp who has been described as the head of a shadow government, could soon assume Ghalibaf's role. If he takes control of the negotiations, it may reflect a broader internal power reshuffle in Tehran. Meanwhile, some sources claim Ghalibaf was forced out after trying to bring the nuclear issue back to the negotiating table with Washington, a move that reportedly triggered strong backlash from domestic factions. Even diplomacy itself has now become a source of deep division inside Tehran. At the same time, Donald Trump canceled plans to send a U.S. envoy to Pakistan on April 25th, showing that the diplomatic channel remains highly fragile. The rivalry between Jalili and Ghalibaf has lasted for more than a decade and resurfaced sharply during the 2024 election, when Jalili refused to withdraw, helping split the conservative vote. If Jalili truly moves into the center of power, Tehran would be sending a clear signal. It wants to enter negotiations from a position of confrontation, not concession. Iran seeks international backing before a decisive moment. While internal fractures are emerging and dialogue with Washington remains uncertain, Iran is simultaneously stepping up diplomatic efforts to avoid falling into isolation. Tehran's immediate focus is strengthening ties with Russia and regional partners before entering any important round of negotiations with the United States. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi's diplomatic trip suggests Tehran is accelerating efforts to secure international backing before entering critical talks with Washington. For Iran, Moscow remains a strategic partner capable of easing diplomatic pressure and increasing Tehran's leverage at the negotiating table. Alongside that northern track, Arachi is also reportedly moving through several diplomatic transit points in the region, including Pakistan and Muscat. These locations have previously been used for quiet communication channels or indirect talks during past crises. Iran is building several diplomatic layers of protection at once. Russia offers international backing, Oman serves as a diplomatic bridge, and Pakistan could serve as a regional intermediary. That is especially important while the military threat has not fully disappeared. If talks with Washington collapse, Iran would still have partners to help ease pressure. If negotiations resume, Tehran could return to the negotiating table in a less isolated position. While the Middle East remains volatile, the strategic consequences are already spreading far beyond the region. First U.S. crude cargo arrives in Japan since the Iran conflict erupted. U.S. crude oil has arrived in Japan for the first time since fighting with Iran broke out, underscoring how the Middle East crisis is reshaping global energy flows. With maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz disrupted, many countries in Asia and Europe are being forced to seek alternative supplies from the United States. On April 26th, a U.S. crude tanker arrived at Tokyo port, marking the first shipment since the conflict escalated on March 28th. According to Kyoto News, Cosmo Energy Holdings confirmed the vessel was carrying around 145,000 kiloliters of crude oil, equal to nearly half a day of Japan's consumption. The tanker departed Texas on March 22nd and transited the Panama Canal before reaching Japan. The development suggests a new supply chain is taking shape, longer and more expensive, but safer than the Hormuz route during a period of instability. Japan's Ministry of Economy said crude imports from the United States in May are expected to be 4 times higher than the same month last year. That is especially significant because Japan still relies on the Middle East for more than 90% of its oil imports. Beyond the United States, Tokyo is also seeking additional supplies from South America and Central Asia. Japan is not alone in adjusting course. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, U.S. exports of crude oil and petroleum products reached a record nearly 12.9 million barrels per day last week. Data from Kepler also showed U.S. LNG exports surged to a record high last month. The Iran crisis is not only shaking the Middle East, it is also giving a strategic boost to America's energy sector, as Washington increasingly becomes an emergency supplier for its allies. The U.S. holds advantage across strategic straits, pressuring Beijing's Belt and Road network. The United States appears to be gradually building a maritime ring of control to counter China's Belt and Road initiative. The latest focal point is Southeast Asia, where the U.S.-Indonesia Defense Partnership is being upgraded at a time of intensifying U.S.-China competition. With Indonesia positioned near the Strait of Malacca, many view the move as a clear strategic signal aimed at Beijing. According to the Chinese-language edition of the Epoch Times on April 25th, Washington and Jakarta issued a joint statement to strengthen defense cooperation. The announcement came almost simultaneously with increased U.S. military pressure on the Iran front. In practice, Washington is not only managing the Middle East crisis, but also reinforcing its position across the Indo-Pacific. At first glance, this may look like a routine military agreement, but the details carry broader meaning. Both sides agreed to advance maritime surveillance technology, underwater reconnaissance, unmanned aircraft systems, and asymmetric warfare capabilities. These are capabilities directly suited for island competition and control of strategic sea lanes. One proposal now under discussion would allow U.S. aircraft to transit Indonesian airspace under simplified procedures. If finalized, U.S. fighter jets, surveillance aircraft, and UAVs could move through the area more rapidly without requiring full approval for each individual flight. From a military standpoint, that would significantly shorten response times during a regional crisis. While Washington maintains a strong military presence in the Middle East, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth hosted his Indonesian counterpart at the Pentagon to discuss the arrangement. This signals a two-front strategy, managing the immediate crisis while preparing for long-term competition with China. Malacca, an energy vulnerability Beijing cannot easily escape. The larger answer lies in the Strait of Malacca. It is one of the world's most critical maritime choke points, and has long been viewed as a vulnerable link in China's energy security. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, around 23.2 million barrels of oil per day passed through the route in the first half of 2025, nearly 30% of total global seaborne oil trade. By comparison, the Strait of Hormuz carries roughly 20.9 million barrels per day, less than Malacca. China is the largest beneficiary of the route, with an estimated half of all oil tankers passing through it bound for China. Many cargoes leaving the Middle East and Africa after departing Hormuz must still transit Malacca before entering the South China Sea. That is why the concept of the Malacca dilemma has long existed inside Beijing. In 2003, former Chinese leader Hu Jintao said roughly 4/5 of China's imported oil passed through this route. International media at the time viewed that as a public acknowledgement of a strategic vulnerability. Some Chinese analysts have also acknowledged that China lacks the ability to control Malacca, while the route sits within a wider network of waterways where the United States can exert global influence. Control of Malacca gives leverage over part of China's energy security. That helps explain why every military or diplomatic move around Indonesia and Malacca is closely watched in Beijing. For China, this is not just a strait, it is an economic lifeline. If Malacca is tightened, how much time does China have? Malacca is naturally the shortest, cheapest, and most efficient route for delivering oil to China. If the route were blocked, Beijing would be forced to reroute through the Sunda Strait, Lombok Strait, and Makassar Strait. These routes are deep enough for supertankers, but they extend voyages by more than 1,000 kilometers, sharply increasing transport costs and delivery times. All three alternative straits fall within Indonesia's sphere of influence. That means if Jakarta moves closer to Washington, China's room to maneuver could narrow significantly. Beyond maritime routes, China also has an energy corridor running through Myanmar into Yunnan. However, its capacity is only around 22 million tons per year, equal to roughly 440,000 barrels per day, far too small compared with the scale of China's import demand. Another option is the pipeline network from Kazakhstan, Russia, and Central Asia. But even combined, those overland routes are difficult to compare with the massive volume moved by oil tankers. According to international estimates, China's strategic petroleum reserves currently stand at around 450 to 500 million barrels. If seaborne imports were completely disrupted while land routes remained open, those reserves would cover only about 3 months of net import demand. In a lighter scenario, if only Hormuz were disrupted while Malacca stayed open, reserves could last more than 200 days. China's strategic weakness is not a shortage of oil. It is that most of its oil must pass through maritime choke points where rivals can apply pressure. From Malacca to Gibraltar. Then, from April 15th to 16th, the United States and Morocco signed a defense cooperation roadmap for 2026 through 2036 in Washington, marking a new upgrade in bilateral military ties. The agreement focuses on training, defense industry cooperation, cybersecurity, and expanded strategic coordination. Geostrategically, Morocco's greatest value lies in its position near the Strait of Gibraltar. It is the gateway linking the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea, and a mandatory route for vessels entering the Mediterranean from outside waters. Though narrow, Gibraltar remains one of the world's most important maritime choke points. Placed alongside the Panama Canal, Hormuz, and Malacca, it becomes clear that Washington maintains influence over multiple global trade bottlenecks. This is not merely a network of military bases, but a structure of control over the strategic transport corridors of the world economy. From Panama, Greenland, and Venezuela to the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and now Gibraltar, U.S. strategy appears increasingly focused on maritime advantage in its long-term competition with China. Washington appears to be building a new maritime belt, where the objective is not only military presence, but preserving influence over the gateways that shape global trade and energy flows. Ukraine breaches defenses in Crimea as Russia is forced to defend from the Black Sea to the Urals. Meanwhile, another front continues to heat up in the Black Sea. Ukraine claims it penetrated Russia's air defense network in Crimea and struck 3 warships along with several key military targets. The Security Service of Ukraine said it had carried out a large-scale special operation on the peninsula, which remains under Russian control. According to the SBU, on the night of April 26, special units used UAVs to launch a coordinated strike against the naval base at Sevastopol and Belbek Air Base. If confirmed, it would mark one of Kyiv's most significant deep strikes against Russian military infrastructure in Crimea in recent months. Ukrainian officials said the targets included the large landing ships Yamal and Azov, the reconnaissance vessel Ivan Kurs, a MiG-31 at Belbek, the training center of the Black Sea Fleet, an air defense radio reconnaissance command post, and a Nebo-M radar system. Kyiv was targeting not only warships, but also trying to degrade Russia's wider command, surveillance, and response network. Some Ukrainian media outlets said imagery from the strike site had been obtained. If accurate, it would suggest Ukraine's intelligence, targeting, and battle damage assessment capabilities are improving significantly. On the economic front, Ukraine's commander-in-chief Oleksandr Syrsky estimated Russia's total direct and indirect losses have now reached roughly $25.5 billion. He gave that figure during a meeting in Kyiv with Admiral Giuseppe Cavodragone, chairman of the NATO Military Committee and the chairman of the European Union Military Committee. According to Syrsky, Russia continues to apply pressure with large forces, but Ukraine's front lines are being held through UAVs and asymmetric warfare. He stressed that for 4 consecutive months, Ukraine's drone units alone inflicted more casualties on Russian troops than Moscow was able to replace during the same period. In Yekaterinburg, a central residential area was reportedly damaged and 6 people were injured following an attack. It remains unclear whether that was an intended target or the result of a UAV being diverted by electronic warfare measures. Russian officials have also acknowledged that the Ural region is now within range of hostile drones. That reflects a major shift in the war, from a frontline conflict to one increasingly capable of reaching deep into Russia's industrial rear areas and social psychology. Ukraine is trying to turn low-cost technology into strategic leverage, using drones to force Russia to defend an ever wider and more expensive battle space. The world is moving on multiple fronts at once, from Tehran to Malacca to Crimea. In your view, which flashpoint is most likely to reshape the global balance next? Leave your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to follow the channel for the latest updates.